It was Halloween night, the time of year when the veil between fun and fear seems to thin. I never really celebrated it much, but this year I thought I'd at least hand out some candy. Besides, it was supposed to be a distraction from the emptiness that filled my small suburban house. Living alone wasn't easy, especially after my recent breakup, but I was learning to cope. I sat on the couch, a bowl of candy on my lap, mindlessly scrolling through my phone, waiting for trick-or-treaters. My neighborhood was typically quiet, with a few kids but nothing too chaotic. Occasionally, I'd hear laughter and the faint rustle of costumes outside. But as the night dragged on, it seemed like fewer and fewer kids were making their way down my street. It was only 9 p.m., but the trick-or-treaters had all but disappeared. The TV was on in the background, playing some generic horror movie. I wasn't paying much attention, but the eerie music and flickering lights set the perfect, unsettling atmosphere. I stared at the screen, feeling a strange sense of unease. Something just felt off. Maybe it was the silence that now engulfed the house. I shook my head and got up to put the candy bowl away. "No one else is coming," I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the odd feeling that had settled in my gut. Just as I turned toward the kitchen, a sharp knock echoed from the front door. I froze. I hadn't expected anyone this late. My heart quickened. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. It's probably just some late-night trick-or-treaters, I thought, walking toward the door with the candy bowl in hand. But something felt different. The knock was slow, deliberate, almost too heavy, like it wasn't just some kids playing around. I peeked through the peephole. Standing on my porch was a man in a hockey mask, Jason Voorhees. He stood there, motionless, a machete gripped loosely in one hand. His costume was disturbingly realistic, dark, dirt-smeared clothes, and the cold, expressionless mask staring directly at the door. I hesitated, my heart thudding in my chest. The rational part of me screamed, "It's just a prank." It was Halloween after all. People dress up as horror icons. But this felt different. He wasn't moving, wasn't asking for candy. He was just standing there, staring at the door. My pulse raced, and I hesitated with my hand hovering over the lock. Something about his stance unnerved me. It wasn't playful. It was too still, too real. I could feel my palms beginning to sweat. I slowly stepped away from the door, hoping he'd just leave. But then there was another knock. Louder this time, more insistent. "He's just some guy in a costume," I told myself again. But when I looked through the peephole again, his head had tilted slightly, as if he knew I was watching. That's when he raised the machete and slammed it against the door. I jumped back, the loud thud reverberating through the house. My heart pounded in my ears. Panic surged through me. I dropped the candy bowl, the contents spilling across the floor, and scrambled backward. Another slam. He was hitting the door with the machete, trying to get in. I ran to the kitchen, grabbing my phone with trembling hands.
911, what's your emergency?
The operator's voice crackled through the phone. "There's a man outside my house. He's trying to break in," I shouted, my voice shaking.
What is your address?
She asked calmly, but I could hear the urgency in her tone. I gave my address, pacing back and forth, every sound heightened by the rush of adrenaline. I could still hear him outside, slamming the machete against the door. My breathing became ragged as I crouched down behind the kitchen counter, hoping the door would hold.
Stay on the line. Officers are on the way.
The operator assured me.
Stay calm and don't engage.
But my mind was racing. Why wasn't he speaking? Why was he so determined? The sound of the machete pounding against the door made my blood run cold. He wasn't just trying to scare me. He was trying to get in. The next few minutes felt like hours. I heard the wood of the door begin to splinter, the force of the blows growing more violent. I covered my mouth to stifle my sobs. He was going to break through. I could feel it. And then, silence. I held my breath, straining to listen. The pounding had stopped, but I knew better than to feel relief. I peeked around the corner of the counter. The front door was still intact, but barely. The wooden frame was cracked, the lock nearly broken. But where was he? Suddenly, I heard footsteps from inside the house. My blood ran cold. How had he gotten in? My mind raced, trying to remember if I'd left another door unlocked. The back door. I never locked it. How could I have been so stupid? The footsteps were slow, deliberate. He wasn't in a rush. He was hunting me. I crouched lower, clutching the phone in my hands. "Please, hurry," I whispered into the phone.
"The officers are 3 minutes away. Stay hidden,"
the operator said, her voice steady. 3 minutes felt like a lifetime. The footsteps grew closer, the sound of his heavy breathing now audible. I could hear the scrape of the machete dragging against the floor. I fought to stay calm, but every fiber of my being screamed in terror. My eyes darted around the kitchen. There was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. Then I saw his boots step into the kitchen. I swallowed a scream. His hulking figure filled the doorway, the machete dragging along the ground as he stepped closer. He didn't say a word. His mask gleamed under the kitchen light, emotionless, soulless. My breath caught in my throat as he walked closer, his heavy boots echoing off the tile floor. I pressed myself tighter against the counter, trying to make myself disappear. He stopped. For a moment, it seemed like he could hear my racing heart. Just then, the faint sound of sirens in the distance pierced the silence. His head snapped toward the window. He hesitated, and then, without warning, he bolted. I didn't move until I heard the door slam shut behind him. The sirens grew louder, and I forced myself to stand. My legs were shaking so violently I could barely keep myself upright. I stumbled toward the door just as the police cars pulled up, their flashing lights illuminating the street. The officers rushed in, guns drawn, but he was already gone. I collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath, my entire body trembling with fear. They searched the house and the yard, but they couldn't find him. The back door was wide open, and they discovered footprints leading into the woods behind my house. He had been watching me, stalking me for who knows how long. I hadn't slept much since the incident. I could still hear the sound of that machete slamming against the door, could still see that soulless mask staring back at me in my mind. But the police hadn't stopped their search, and 2 days later they called with news. They had caught him. His real name was Thomas Whitley, a disturbed man with a long history of violence and mental illness. He had a sick obsession with Halloween and horror movie characters. Every year, he would dress up as a different horror icon and hunt people. Some years he'd scare them and let them go. Other years he wasn't so merciful. The police had been after him for years, but he had always slipped through the cracks, until now. They found him hiding in an abandoned shack deep in the woods, still wearing the Jason Voorhees mask. Inside, they uncovered a collection of Halloween costumes and weapons, each linked to a different unsolved attack. The detective told me he had planned to kill me. He had watched me for weeks, learned my routines, and waited for the perfect moment. Halloween night. I sat in stunned silence as the reality sunk in. I was just another victim to him. Just another face in the crowd. But I was lucky. This time, the mask came off before it was too late. But the memory of that night, the mask, the machete, the relentless pounding at my door, would haunt me forever. I always loved Halloween. The crisp autumn air, the crunch of fallen leaves underfoot, and the excitement of dressing up and wandering the neighborhood in search of candy. This year, I had chosen to go trick-or-treating alone. My friends were busy with their own plans, but I didn't mind. I was a 16-year-old girl, and I felt confident enough to venture out on my own. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I donned my costume, a classic witch, complete with a flowing black dress and a pointy hat. With my pillowcase in hand, I set off down the familiar streets of my neighborhood, the decorations glowing eerily in the twilight. I could feel the anticipation building as I approached the first house, its porch illuminated by flickering jack-o'-lanterns. I rang the doorbell, and a friendly woman greeted me, her arms full of candy. After thanking her, I continued on, my bag growing heavier with each house I visited. As I turned the corner onto a quieter street, I noticed a boy standing at the end of the block. He was wearing a Michael Myers costume, complete with a mask and a tattered jumpsuit. It was odd. He looked too old to be trick-or-treating, yet too young to be out alone. I shrugged it off and continued to the next house, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I glanced back, the boy seemed closer. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but as I moved from house to house, I could see him more clearly. He was following me, keeping a distance that felt deliberate. Nervous, I quickened my pace, darting between houses, but the further I went, the more I could feel his presence looming. It wasn't just that he was following me, it was the way he moved. It was almost like he floated instead of walked, his steps silent against the pavement. After visiting a few more houses, I decided to head back home. As I turned to retrace my steps, I caught a glimpse of the boy again. This time, he was standing right outside a house I had just visited, watching me with an unsettling intensity. I could see his eyes now, dark, hollow, and devoid of warmth. Panic surged through me. I picked up the pace, my heart racing as I rushed toward my street. The thought of calling my mom crossed my mind, but I was too terrified to take my phone out of my costume pocket. As I turned the final corner, I could feel the weight of his gaze on my back. I dared to glance over my shoulder, and to my horror, he was now closer than ever, practically at my heels. Desperate to escape, I sprinted toward my house, the porch light flickering like a beacon in the darkness. I fumbled with the keys, my hands trembling as I tried to unlock the door. The boy was mere feet away now, his expression unreadable beneath the Michael Myers mask. Finally, the door clicked open, and I dashed inside, slamming it shut behind me. I pressed my back against the door, my breath coming in quick gasps. I peered through the window, my heart pounding as I tried to see if he had followed me. He was standing on the sidewalk, motionless, just staring at my house. My skin prickled with fear as I watched him. He raised a hand slowly, pointing directly at me. A chill ran down my spine, and I stumbled back from the window, my heart racing. Minutes passed, and I dared to glance outside again. The street was empty, the boy had vanished, but the feeling of dread lingered. I couldn't shake the sense that he had been watching me for far longer than I realized. That Halloween night, I learned to appreciate the thrill of the holiday a little less. From that day on, I never went trick-or-treating alone again. I still wonder who that boy was and what he wanted. But every Halloween since, I feel the weight of eyes watching me from the shadows, reminding me that some costumes are better left in the dark. The night was still, the kind of stillness that settled over the town on Halloween. I had just finished watching a horror movie, the kind that left me feeling both exhilarated and slightly on edge. As a college student living alone in a small apartment, I was used to the quiet, but tonight felt different. Maybe it was the flickering lights outside or the rustle of leaves against my window. After turning off the TV, I prepared for bed, brushing my teeth and climbing under the covers. My phone was on the bedside table, and I could see it light up with notifications from friends sharing Halloween selfies and spooky memes. Just as I started to drift off, the sound of my phone ringing startled me. It was 12:01 a.m. I squinted at the screen, seeing a number I didn't recognize. A tingle of unease crawled up my spine, but I answered anyway, curiosity getting the better of me. "Hello?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There was silence on the other end, and just as I was about to hang up, I heard a low, raspy voice whisper,
"I see you."
My heart dropped. "Who is this?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. No response, just heavy breathing. I felt my palms grow clammy as a chill swept through the room. I glanced around my apartment, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. "Hello? Is anyone there?" I pressed again, my voice trembling now.
"I'm coming for you."
The voice finally replied, dripping with malice. Panic surged through me and I slammed the phone down, my breath quickening. My mind raced, replaying the words over and over. Was this a prank, or was someone truly watching me? I tried to calm myself. It was probably just some Halloween prank. I took a few deep breaths and decided to try to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of the building seemed amplified. Every shadow felt like it was alive. Minutes dragged by, but just as I thought I might finally drift off, my phone rang again. I picked it up hesitantly, already feeling the dread settle in my stomach. It was the same number. My instincts screamed at me not to answer, but I felt trapped between curiosity and fear. "Hello?" I answered again, my voice barely above a whisper.
"Did you really think I would leave you alone?"
The voice was even lower this time, almost playful. I felt my heart race. "Who are you? What do you want?" I nearly shouted, my fear boiling over into anger.
"Just wanted to make sure you are still awake,"
the voice taunted.
"I wouldn't want you to miss our little meeting."
A wave of nausea hit me. I jumped out of bed, my mind racing. I knew I had to get out of my apartment. I grabbed my keys and opened the front door, peering out into the dimly lit hallway. It was empty. I sprinted to the stairwell and headed down to the lobby, the echo of my footsteps making me feel exposed and vulnerable. I made it outside, breathing in the cool night air, trying to calm my racing heart. I felt safer in the open, but the dread was still heavy on my chest. I decided to call my best friend, hoping she'd pick up and help me make sense of the situation. As the phone rang, I glanced back at my building. The lights were off in my apartment, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. My friend finally answered, her sleepy voice a comfort amidst the chaos.
"Hey, are you okay? It's so late."
She mumbled. "I don't know. I keep getting these creepy calls. Someone is saying they're coming for me." I felt tears prick at my eyes.
"What? That's terrifying. Do you want me to come over?"
I nodded, forgetting she couldn't see me. "Yes, please. I just don't want to be alone right now."
"I'm on my way. Just stay put, okay?"
she replied quickly.
"Don't hang up. I will call the police for you."
Relief flooded through me as I clung to my phone. "Okay, thank you," I whispered, trying to steady my breathing. She stayed on the line with me, reassuring me while calling the police on another phone. As she did, I kept glancing around, trying to calm myself. But as I stood there, the streetlights flickered, and I felt a presence behind me. I turned quickly, but the street was empty. Just then, my phone buzzed with another call, and I jumped. It was the same number. I took a deep breath, steeling myself as I answered.
"Are you scared?"
the voice asked, now closer, almost playful. "Who are you?" I screamed, feeling my heart pound in my ears.
"Look out at your window,"
he replied, his voice dripping with amusement. I hesitated, my stomach sinking. Slowly, I turned to glance back at my apartment building. The darkness loomed, but then I saw it. A shadow, darker than the rest, lurking just out of sight. "No!" I shouted, backing away. "Get away from there!" Before I could do anything, the wailing sound of sirens filled the air. The figure behind the curtain vanished as police cars pulled up. I felt my legs buckle as the tension finally released. Moments later, my friend arrived and rushed to my side. I collapsed into her arms. "He was here," I whispered, my voice shaky. Thanks to her call, the police began investigating. And a few days later, they found out who it was. Someone I never would have suspected. It was David, a guy I'd known for years, who had been in my apartment dozens of times. He was always friendly, but there was something off about him that I'd never really noticed. Turns out, he had been stalking me for months, watching my every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The calls were his twisted way of tormenting me, of seeing how far he could push me before I broke. That Halloween night changed everything for me. I never felt safe in my apartment again. I kept my curtains drawn, my phone by my side, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching. Every Halloween since, I dreaded the sound of my phone ringing at midnight, fearing I might hear that voice again, taunting me from the darkness.